Good afternoon. My name's Steve Eisenberg. I'm one of the co-founders of the JSCNY, along with Gavin and Jody Samuels. I want to thank Jody for putting this program together, and our dear assistant, Stacy, as well. Yom HaShoah. Yom HaShoah. So many of you are aware that I led over maybe 24 birthright trips. And you might be aware that birthright, one of the 5 points that every birthright trip had to experience, was going to Yad Vashem. And at the end of the experience of Yad Vashem, there'd be a sikkum, there'd be a conclusion, closing remarks, and I would always state the following: that if we leave Yad Vashem mournful, as we should, sad, as we should, bewildered, as we should, I think that we missed a major point, for me at least. And that is, it's not just about the 6 million, third of the Jewish people that were eradicated by the Nazis in almost all of Europe, and almost 2 million children. But what is our commitment to the living Jewish people? What is the commitment that we're making to the living Jews? Not just about Kaddish Judaism, but Kiddush Judaism. So many years ago, Menachem Begin, Zichron Bracha, former Prime Minister of Israel, visited Mayor Ed Koch, former Mayor Ed Koch, Zichron Bracha, in his office in Gracie Mansion. And Mayor Koch said to Prime Minister Begin at the time, "You know, I'm a survivor." And Menachem Begin didn't miss a trick. He said, "No, you're not. Your father was a survivor. You're not a survivor. You were born in the Bronx." He said, "No." When I visited Yad Vashem, I saw this big sign, poster, which was captured from Nazi headquarters, and it had a listing of all the population, Jewish populations throughout the world. And I saw United States, 6 million. Down the list, Poland, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, all the countries. And I realized that if Hitler and his cronies would have had their way, I too would have been eliminated. So therefore, I'm a survivor. Again, Baruch Hashem, thank God we were not there physically, but we were there spiritually in a way, because had they had their way, we would have all been wiped away. And I believe it behooves us in this generation that we make a commitment to our 6 million brothers and sisters, almost a third of the Jewish people. There are 18 million Jews in 1939, 1940. Now at the end of the war, there were 12 million left. But what is our commitment to the Jewish people today? How do we help another Jew? Another Jew is my best friend. Jews mishpacha, a smile, a job, inviting them for Shabbat, inviting them to a class. And I believe that is why we remember Yom HaShoah, not only to commemorate the destruction of so much of our people, but also to make a commitment for the future. And that is what JSCNY is all about. And that is what many of our partner organizations are all about, is a commitment that we make to the living Jewish people. And I think that is the greatest gift that we can do for those who perished. So it's a very, very introspective day, Yom HaShoah. But I believe the real message for us is, what is a commitment to the Jewish people? I don't have to love the way someone necessarily observes Judaism, but we have to love another Jew. And we know the Germans didn't differentiate between the most observant, pious, Haredi Jew and the most secular, even assimilated, intermarried Jew. To them, a Jew is a Jew. And we have to begin to think this way. The Jews, it's a brother from another mother, a sister from another mister, that we're one people. Am Yisrael Chai. And thank you so much for listening, and thank you, Jody, Stacy, for putting this program together.
Okay, welcome everyone. Jody Samuels from the Jewish International Connection, a co-founder with Steve. We started the Jewish International Connection in 2000. We did it as a Jewish home away from home, an opportunity for all these Jews moving to New York City from all over the world to meet, connect with other Jewish people, give them inspired Jewish opportunities, Shabbat meals, holiday programs, social events, networking events, and give them a soft landing into the community. We moved to Israel 6 years ago, and now we've continued this, and now we have JSC in Jerusalem and JSC Tel Aviv, as well as New York, of course, and BC, that's before Corona. We were doing about 10,000 people were coming through the door of all our events every year, mainly young professionals, and we were running about 300 events a year, including heritage trips as well. And now I'm so happy, for the first time, this is a hybrid event for those of you who are watching, that we actually have a room full of people in Jerusalem to meet our survivor tonight, as well as we have all of you watching. So it's fantastic to really be coming back to the real world, and hopefully we'll see you all more in person and have a lot more events. We do have some amazing things coming up, including a trip to Dubai, Israel's newest peace partner, happening on the 25th of April. If anybody's interested, you can check out JICNY on Facebook, JIC Israel, or our website. We have lots of events. We have weekly Torah classes. Steve teaches a very popular Torah class for 20 years. We have Nili Salem, who teaches every Wednesday night in Jerusalem, as well as Shabbat dinners, social events, dating programs, and most of our things now are hybrid, online, in person. We will reach you wherever we can. As Steve says, our job is to connect with every Jewish person. And with that, I'm going to introduce to you our speaker tonight. And what makes our speaker have an interesting story, every survivor has an interesting story. She was born in Belgium. She was the youngest of 6 siblings. She was spoiled, as all youngest are, and her whole family was separated, and yet miraculously, they all managed to survive. And with that, I thank Naomi, and thank you so much for taking time out. And she is going to share with us her story.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the nice introduction that you gave me. I'm very, I never spoke to so many people. And I'll start by saying that like Jody said, I came from a family from 6 children, and we were all separated during the war. And I have to tell you first that to explain how we survived, I have to tell you that I had a brother. He was 18 years old, and he enlisted in the Belgian army, not because he loved Belgium, because he was a big Zionist, and he wanted to go to Palestine and fight for the Jewish people. So by the time he almost finished his service, the war broke out. And that was in May 1940, when the Germans entered Belgium. My family, so he was in the army. I had one brother, my oldest brother, who lived in London. He was born in London in the First World War, so he lived there, so he was safe in a way. I had another brother who was also born in England, but he lived with us in Belgium. So we tried to escape. We knew that the Germans are coming in. We tried to escape. So we went to La Panne. It was like a little town next to the seashore, to be able to get into France and to escape. But there were hundreds of people there. And my parents were actually Polish. They came from Białystok, and they never became Belgian citizens. But my 2 sisters, they were born in Belgium, and they were Belgian citizens. So we went to the border, and naturally there were hundreds and hundreds of people lying on the floor, and we couldn't go through. The only one who could go through was my brother, who was English, but he wanted to stay with the family, so he stayed with us. And everybody, yeah, so we all were on the field. And at one point, my brother that was with us, he sees the soldier, my brother who is a soldier, he's running around with a big brown bag, and he's looking for us. So he tells my mother, this is David. So he came running, my mother came running to him, and we had nothing to eat there. It was like nothing, no water, no food. And he comes and he gives her the bag with 2 hot breads. He found us. Anyway, and then he disappeared. It was dangerous for him. So after a while, we saw that nobody could go through. So we went back home. We had rented a little apartment in La Panne. We went back home. The next day, they announced that the Germans are going to bombard a lot, the whole town. So what we did, we looked for shelter. And my mother, my brother, my 2 sisters and me, we went to a basement from a church, because it was like a very strong type of a building, and it had two what do you call it? Towers. 2 towers, yeah, thank you. So there were hundreds of people there. And as night came, we heard the bombs starting to fly and the zooming of the planes. And and suddenly it got dark, and we were all sitting there and shivering. And suddenly we saw big pieces of fire flying through the window, across the window. And we all thought that was the end of our being. So my brother, he was a yeshiva boy, and he started to say Tehillim. Now I was very young, and the only thing that came to my mind was a motzi. So I kept on repeating the motzi again and again and again. Anyway, we survived. As a matter of fact, my father didn't want to come to the church because he was very religious. He says, God will protect me wherever I am. And he stayed in the apartment. So anyway, we all survived. After this, it was, yeah. So the next day, the Germans came in. And you could see through the window all on motorcycles. And, you know, it was very scary. And and we went back to Antwerp. We had no choice. In Antwerp, we stayed in our apartment. And at that time, that was like in the Germans came in. Oh yeah, my brother, who was a soldier in the Belgian army, he was already almost finished his army. So he was already he knew how to fight. So they sent him up front to fight the Germans before they came in. And he was, and 70 soldiers were there fighting the Germans, and 7 survived, and he was one of the 7. That's another miracle. Anyway, by that time, the Germans were there already, and it was very dangerous for my brother to be there because they wanted to send them to camp, whatever. So my parents took a smuggler to take him across the border. And the smuggler took him there. You had to pay him naturally a lot of money. And the smuggler left him there and went and didn't pass him. So he came back home, and then they did it again. And this time he passed. He ended up eventually in Cuba. So that saved his life. Now, so that, yeah. So then, I'm a little, yeah, my brother Joseph, the English brother, that he had a they sent him a note that he has to come to the Germans and present himself. So he went. What they did with him, they sent him in Germany in a camp for prisoners of war, not as a Jew, as a British subject. So he ended up there, and he stayed there for 5 years. The thing is that there were Jews and non-Jews there. So every day, or whatever, every day they used to tell the Jews, tomorrow we're going to kill you. So this is how he lived for 5 years, but he survived. Now, then in 1942, they started to have razzias. That means they assembled Jews. They went to the homes and grabbed Jews out of their homes and put them in a truck and sent them to Malin. Malin was a Sabbellager. This is a camp where they assembled people. And when that camp was full, they sent them straight to Auschwitz. I was in this camp for 6 months in Malin. I'll tell you how I got there. First of all, my 2 sisters were Belgian citizens. And at that time, the Belgian citizens were protected because they were Belgians. So they were not supposed to be deported. So somehow they got a note that they have to present themselves, my 2 sisters, to the Judenrat. Judenrat was Jewish people who from the Germans set them up there. They should do the things instead of them, to make sure they get to the camps. So they went to the Judenrat, and the Judenrat told them, he said, listen, you have to go. They probably send you back, but you should go. So they went to the camp. They came there and they complained to the commandant, to the commandant, the German, and they said, listen, we are Belgium. We're not supposed to be here. So they decided, instead of sending them to Auschwitz, he says, you're going to stay here and you're going to work. So they worked in that camp. Okay, so and my parents and me, we went into hiding. We were hiding in an empty house. And in that house lived a cousin of my mother, and she was a Belgian citizen. And she was allowed to be there. So, and we were Polish, naturally, my parents and myself. So we went to this house and we lived on the first floor, and they lived on top. And the shutters were closed, so people thought that nobody lives in that house. So that's where we were hiding. One day, we hear people being picked up around the corner and yelling and screaming. People were screaming and yelling. And so we knew it was very close to where we stayed. So we went up. We had an attic. So we went up into the attic. The attic had a ladder. And we walked on the ladder and we went up and we pulled the ladder after us and we closed the trap. So it was my father, my mother, and me who were sitting there. And lo and behold, not long after that, we hear the Germans coming up the steps with the boots. Raus, Jude, raus, raus, get out. And we were like sitting and not breathing even. Now my mother's cousin, she was Belgian, so they didn't touch her. And they were looking in all the rooms and banging the doors open and closed. And somehow and this attic had a frame on the ceiling. All they had to do is look up and think that maybe somebody's there, but they didn't. They left. And which was also a miracle. They left. Okay, so after a while, my cousin starts calling my parents, come down, come down. They left. And we don't believe what she's saying. We thought the Germans were standing behind her. And it was a trick to get us to come down. So she started swearing on her children and her husband and her health, and finally we came down. So she told us that they said that they're going to come back tonight. So we didn't know what to do. We had no place to go. My mother had a father, an old father, who was 82 years old, and he was living in another apartment, another street. And we figured, let's go for the night there. So we took a little suitcase, whatever, and we're not allowed to go out at night after 7 or 8. So we were like really going into the dark streets, trying to get there. And we come there, we knock on the door, and my grandmother comes down. She was the second wife I tell you why I'm saying that. She comes down and she sees us and we tell her the story. She says, I cannot let you come up, because he's very, very nervous. He's very jittery, and he I don't know what's going to happen to him. So we had no choice, and we went back home. And we didn't get undressed. We lie down on the beds with our clothes, waiting for them to pick us up. Completely helpless. There was no place to go. You know, sometimes people say, why didn't you fight back? People that have no idea how they treated the Jews. They took away their identity. They took away their names. They became like numbers, and they took away their strength emotionally and physically. So anyway, we went back. Somehow they didn't come. They came 6 months later. They knocked on the door. And oh yes, my cousin, she took a big chance by telling them that we were not there when we were in the attic. If they would have found us, she was really a hero. They would have deported her and us together, and that would be the end. So she was really a hero. She was wonderful. I told this to her grandchildren. Anyway, so yeah. So where am I? Excuse me, but I'm a little. So what did I say? That
they didn't pick you up for 6 months.
what?
They came back 6 months later.
Oh yeah, 6 months later, they knock on the door. I'm sorry, my age also. 6 months later, they come, they knock on the door early in the morning. My father was putting on, he had his tefillin on and was praying. My mother was still in bed, me too. And they come in and they start screaming and they rip my father's tefillin off him. And they throw the books and everything on the floor, and they walk into the bedroom. My mother was not even dressed. Said, get dressed, hurry up. And the truck was standing in front of the door for us to get in. And my father started to, with a broken German, he started to tell them, I have 2 daughters in that camp that are working there. So I gave him a smack in his face, naturally. And I started to cry. And anyway, we got in the truck. There were already other people there. And it was very, very, very scary. And they drove us to Malin, to Mechelen, to that camp, to the Sammellager. We come there, the door opened up. Oh yes, in the truck, my father had a tiny little beard, like a goatee. So he had a hand had to cut. Yeah, whatever. And he started cutting his little beard. And I never saw my father in my life without a beard. And I looked at him, I didn't recognize him. And I started to cry. Now, the reason he did that, because the word went around that the Germans pulling out the beards from Jews, pulled them out from their faces. Anyway, so we arrived there, the gate opens and the truck goes into the court. And my 2 sisters with other people are standing there and waiting for the people. And we look at my 2 sisters, they turned white like the wall because they saw us. So they went to the commandant. How do you say that in English? The commandant. And they begged them they should give us work. This is their parents and my sister. Can you please give them work? Can you please give them work? If you have work, they don't deport you. So anyway, so we got work. My mother was sewing on a machine. And my father and me, we were like folding cartons for soap, whatever. We were busy. And so we stayed there for 6 months. It was pretty tough. So the camp was not full with people. We stayed, we did our chores. And, you know, we were always wondering what's going to happen. And I made a friend there in that camp. Her name was Helene Silberschatz. She was a girl that was caught. And she was there alone. She was my age. No, she was a little older. And she had, her parents sent her packages with all kinds of goodies, and she used to share it with me. Very nice, we got very friendly. And then one day she tells me, don't worry. Oh, yeah. And then the transport was going to leave. The camp was full and she was going to be on that transport to Auschwitz. I didn't know they were going to Auschwitz. Nobody knew. They just go. So I said, well, I'm so concerned about you. And she says, don't worry, Naomi, I'll be free before you. So what happened when she left and she jumped from the train and they killed her. So it was a very hard thing. After that, we stayed there. And then we came into that camp in January 43. And in June 43, the Queen of Belgium, her name is Elizabeth, she demanded to the Germans that they don't deport the Belgian people, they should be free. So the door opened up, and my sisters with other girls that worked there and people that were Belgian, and some of them and the families went along, and we got free. We went out. It was an unbelievable miracle. So we went out. So what we did is we went to Brussels, not to Antwerp. Brussels was a little bigger town, and you could hide there. The war wasn't over at all. It was the end of it was June 43. So I don't know how we rented the apartment. I have no idea. I don't know where the money came from. I have no idea. Somehow we got an apartment, and we had no money whatsoever. So my two sisters went to work as maids in families, in different families. And I was with my parents. So I don't know how many weeks later, I have no idea. My sisters were picked up in those families, and they had to say where they lived. So they came to us, and the Germans came to our apartment, and they picked us up again. So this time they sent us to the Gestapo quarters in Brussels. There used to be an office from the Gestapo, Avenue Louise, I know I remember the street. And we come there and they put us in a cell, maybe 30, 40 people. They pushed us in one cell and they locked the door. And in front of the cell, there was a German with a rifle. And we didn't know what was going to happen to us. So, so at one moment, I had to go to the bathroom. So we called the guards there, and he opened the door. And there was only standing room, couldn't even sit. That's how small the cell was. And so he accompanied me to the bathroom with the rifle. I felt like a criminal, you know. And then he brought me back to the cell. I don't remember if we slept there one night or maybe not, but at one moment we all were called upstairs to the office from the commander, from the Gestapo, and they started to select who is going where. My two sisters were sent back to Malines. And at that time they had, which the Germans did, they had an old age home in Brussels, and they had children's homes in different places out of the city. Why did they have that? They wanted to show the world, we don't deport old people. We have an old age home. We don't deport children. This was like a face, a front. They had about 4 or 5 children's orphanages. So my parents ended up in the old age home. They were 55 and 60. They looked already very old in those times. At this age, you looked old. My two sisters went back to Mechelen, and me, they sent me to an orphanage. So we were all separated. So what happened is when my two sisters came back there, one of my sisters, she thought this was the end of her, and they had a transport number on them that they were going to be shipped to Auschwitz. So she says to my other sister, she says, she was lying down, she was like finished. She says, why don't you go up in the evening when the Germans go to their quarters or whatever, they always pass by the court, go stand at the door and ask them that we were here, tell them we were here for 11 months. Please, can we be free? We're Belgian citizens. Anyway, that's what she did. He says, I'll tell you in the morning. In the morning, they came to them, they said, you could go. I don't know, Mina Shamayim. So they went to children's homes as monitors to work with the younger children. So one was in Wezenbeek, another one was in Linkebeek, was different orphanages, and I was in another place, in Namur. We don't know all these names, but we were like 150 kids there, and we had chores to do. We were doing the laundry and for everybody, and sewing whatever it was ripped. And there was an infirmary, and I was graduated to be the nurse's helper, which I love to do. And it took me a long time to get used to be there, and I was crying, and my family, they kept, we corresponded. I got all the time little packages, and it was very interesting. My brother in Cuba was writing to my brother in England. My brother in England was writing to my brother in Germany, who was in the camp. And my brother from London, we connected like this. It was just amazing, the connection that we had. Anyway, so then what happened is, so we stayed in that home, and my sisters were working, and then they always concerned about me. I was the baby of the family. They called me baby till I was 9 years old. So do you have enough food? Do you have enough this? Do you have enough blanket? One of my sisters took her blanket and gave it to somebody who was going there. And this went on like this all the time. And I made a lot of friends there. And we slept on bunk beds, the girls. And I was very, I was in a good humor all the time. I was making everybody laugh. I made jokes. Anyway, this was heaven really compared to what happened. So we had no idea what's happening. 10 days before the end of the war, we had, there was an underground and everything. They were fighting Jews, they were fighting against the Germans underground. So our director was advised that the Germans are coming to pick us up, to deport us. So what he did, he dispersed us in all the villages by non-Jews, in tiny little farms. I happened to get into a farm with an old couple. And I ate kosher and everything. So naturally, what do they give you in a farm? A pig and all that. So I said, I'm vegetarian. And so I had a room with a big, at this time, the bed's like very high. I had a high bed. And above the bed was a big Jesus hanging and a cross. So every night when I said Shema, I put myself underneath the cover and I said Shema. So, and then 10 days later, the war was over. And the people from the orphanage came to pick us up, all of us. And we went back to the home. And then little by little, a lot of kids had nobody anymore. They were all alone. They sent them to Israel, and kids went home, whoever had some place to go. I don't know how I got to my house. I have no idea, but I came home. My parents were living in New York, in Brussels on the 4th floor in an old, very old building full of mice. They had no money. And I come home, I come upstairs, and I see 2 old people sitting and being very concerned because they had no money. There was nothing. And I come and we hug, and I felt, I didn't recognize my parents. They got so old. So I went to the other room and I started to cry. The reason they were so concerned is, they had a lot of kids and they didn't know what the future was going to be. They had no money. And this is what happened then. So I went back to school. My 2 sisters went also to jobs, to work. And we went back. We didn't have an apartment. We had nothing. So I had an uncle who lived in America, and he had a house. So he told us we could stay in his house. That's where we stayed. And little by little, we got back to regular life. I felt very, very, I mean, we were all happy that we survived. It was a very unusual situation because everybody had somebody missing or completely alone. So I had such a guilt feeling. I was actually embarrassed that we all survived. And it was a very bad, it was a joy, and it was also a guilt feeling of having so many people missing, and all my friends and family. My old grandfather was deported. They took him on a chair. They sent him to Auschwitz, and we were all hoping that he died on the train. And just awful stuff. Anyway, then 50 years later, no, not 50, in 1991, I lived in New York. Oh yeah, I came to New York. Anyway, I lived in New York, and there was, and first of all, we didn't believe, people were telling us what was going on in the camps. We thought they were crazy. Nobody believed them. So, and everybody had their stories. And if you told them that you were not in a camp, you're not a survivor. You know, if you went through nothing. So in 1991, there was one woman, and she said the hidden children suffered also. We can't compare to the camps, because what happened in the camps, I can't even understand. So she started an organization, the Hidden Children, and she sent out mail and everything. And we had a get together for 3 days in the Marriott Marquis in Manhattan. And 1,600 people came from all over the world. It was an amazing get together. And I was on the committee from that group. And one day, one of the women there tells me, you know, Naomi, how about you saying the Motzi in front of the, before the dinner? When she said that, I remember my story with the Motzi. So I said, okay, I'll do it. And we went to this get together, and we had all over on the walls were pictures from kids that put, you know, everybody. I had so many photos from the people that stayed in the home with me, and I nailed it down and this and that. And and the dinner came, and I made a little story. I mean, I wrote this down. I have to read this. What happened? Who brings, and then it was printed in the Hamid magazine. Okay, my name is Naomi Waldman. I live in Forest Hills, New York. I was born in Antwerop, Belgium, and I was a hidden child during World War II. When Rachel Berman asked me if I would like to say the Motzi, the blessing of bread, to start the dinner tonight, she had no idea whatsoever the memories it triggered in my mind. Before the Germans invaded Belgium, May 19, 1940, my family tried to escape by going to La Panne, the town near the seashore, by the French border. The night before the Germans marched in, heavy bombing was expected, and people were looking for shelter. My mother, my older brother, my two sisters, and I decided to go to the basement in a nearby church. My father was very, I told you that already, Orthodox, refused to go, and he says, we felt like God will protect him wherever he is, wherever he stayed. As night fell, hundreds of people were huddled together in the church basement. The bombs started falling, and even though I was very young, I remember vividly seeing through the large windows huge masses of flames zooming by, with ferocious explosions shattering glass windows all around us. The end seemed very close. I was extremely frightened and trembled greatly. And while my brother was saying Tehillim, I repeated fervently over and over the only prayer that came to my mind, Amotzi lechem min haaretz, Amotzi lechem min haaretz. The church had two steeples. One was bombed to the ground. The other one, where we were, was untouched. Miraculously, we survived, as did my father. During the Persian Gulf War, I spoke daily with my children who live in Israel. And I told my little granddaughter, Leah, who had heard of my experiences before, not to be afraid when she had to go to the Generatum with a gas mask. That was, you know, when they had this, just keep on saying, "Amotzi lechem min haaretz," and you'll be fine, I told her. She reacted by saying, "But Bobby, I know so many more prayers." Now, 50 years after that frightening night, I'm standing here at the first international gathering of hidden children saying the Motzi. Our sages point out that the miracle of bread is a symbol of life. A seed is planted in the earth. Though it is hidden, as part of my family was hidden in the basement of a church, as we were hidden in an abandoned house in an attic, as all of you were hidden somewhere during the war. Though it is hidden in the earth, the seed is nourished and one day emerges into the sun. The story of the grain of wheat is our story. It is the story of the Jewish people who have again risen from the ashes to rebuild themselves in Israel and all over the world. All of us here surely feel that it is time for the hidden children to emerge. Would you please join me in saying the blessing? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu. So that was very nice. So then I went to work, we all went to work. And then in 1951, I came to America because my sister had moved. There was the Korean War, so everybody was afraid and they left the Belgium, Europe, and they came to America. And at that time, my mother passed away, and that was very awful. She was 67. And I was very attached to her, whatever. So my sister in America kept on writing, come, it's a new life, you'll be happy. So finally, I decided to come to America. I met my husband there, and I married, and I had 4 children, and my 4 children got married. And they had children, and I have I had 17 grandchildren and I have about over 30 great-grandchildren. So I accomplished something surviving the war. With so many other people. Yeah.
Okay, so I am going to ask some questions that have come in from the audience. And if any of you have a question, I can also, in our live audience, that we don't always have, I will say the questions to the camera. But one of the questions was, did you and your family sort of have that survivor's guilt, that you all survived and you were all able to ultimately see each other again, and so many people didn't? Did you have that survivor's guilt that you hear in other scenarios?
Yeah, I told you, it was a pretty bad feeling. I mean, we were happy to be alive naturally, but we were thinking about the people that lost, and I lost so many family too, uncles and aunts and cousins and good friends. So.
Okay, and another question that came in, was this a scenario that was like more typical in Belgium that people survived, or was it just pure luck that your family, was it less onerous than, you know, Poland or other places? But
I think in Belgium, I would say that it was just luck also, but it was definitely better than in Poland and in the other countries, because actually in Belgium, there were 50,000 Jews living before the war, and 25,000 survived. 25,000 were deported. So some Gentiles were hiding Jews, and some were also denouncing them. And all in all, it was a big percentage of people that survived comparing to other countries. Okay. A lot of people were hidden. And the hidden people had many, many very sad stories. There was one friend of mine, she was She was 2 years old and she was adopted, but she was given to a Christian family. And the family, she was very happy. They loved her. And it was their child. And she had a mother and a father. She didn't know nothing else. And her mother came back from camp and she was, she kidnapped, they were kidnapped. They didn't want to give the child back to the Jews. So they kidnapped her and she lived with her mother that she hated because her mother was a little bit, she couldn't stand her, she couldn't smell her. She was extremely happy with those people. And so such a terrible situations happened. Everybody has a story.
In fact, that's actually another question that came in. And I've taken groups to Poland and we have gone to see the homes of people, the farmers or people in the countryside and people who risked their lives to hide. Were you, and it's sometimes just truly incredible because they put their whole families at risk in order to do. Were you ever able to reunite with the families that hid you, not just other survivors?
Actually, nobody hid us. We hid on our own. The only one who was helping us at that time when the Germans came to pick us up was my mother's cousin.
Okay.
So we're not in the situation where people were hiding us.
Okay.
When we lived in that house, which the shutters closed, one day somehow the neighbor came by and she saw my father and she denounced us. She saw my father in the court and he was wearing a kippah. So she's the one who denounced us. I don't know where, and I mean, I have no contact with any of these people, naturally.
Okay, we have a question from our live audience, and I'm going to have to repeat the question because they won't be able to hear it on.
Yeah.
My question is, did having like neighbors report you?
What?
Did having like neighbors report you to the Germans, did that affect the way that you trusted random people that you met in the street later on in life, like when you were in New York?
We didn't trust anyone.
You never trusted
So
anyone?
the question for the audience that's listening in was, because people betrayed you so easily in those times, did it make her fearful of people in the future? You're asking, did it make her fearful and less trusting? Because if your neighbor could betray you, then was it hard to rebuild your trust and faith in people?
I have to mention something else about the anti-Semitism in Belgium. When I was before the war, was rampant. For instance, I started to go to school in a public school. There were Jewish girls and non-Jewish girls. And the teacher in second grade, I remember that very vividly, she used to call the kids to come to the board to write something or to say something. When she called the Jewish kids, she says, Jakubowicz, Sputsky, and when she called the non-Jewish, Monique, Simon, by the first name. So we felt already then to be so different. It was an awful feeling to have to go to school and to go through this. So we really hated the Goyim, the non-Jews. It was like a lot of anti-Semitism going on.
That was already before.
What? Yeah.
Another question? So, yeah, Barbara.
Why didn't you have Belgian citizenship?
Belgium citizenship?
Let me just, the question was why she didn't have Belgium citizenship.
Because in order to get the Belgium citizenship, you have to be 16. And I was only 10. And my parents never became, most of the Jews that came from Poland didn't become Belgian citizens. They just stayed, the way they were. So when my two sisters were 16, they wanted to they became Belgian citizens. That's why.
Okay. One more question, if anybody else has, before we end the, okay, Ahuva.
When did you come to Israel?
Oh.
When did she come to Israel? That's an important question.
That's an important question, yes. I came to Israel 9 years ago. I have a lot of family. I had two sons here, and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And I decided to leave Belgium because I didn't like where I was. And when I came here, that's the first time in my life that I felt I'm home. The feeling I had bought an apartment 20 years before, because I came to visit my kids all the time back and forth. And so I had an apartment here, and I came to Israel, and I'm so happy to be here for many, many reasons. I have children in New York too, which I miss very much. And now with the corona, they couldn't come. And I used to go every Pesach there. And I suggest all young people should come and live here.
Okay, so I just want to thank you, Naomi, so much for your time today. And I think it's such a privilege for us because we're one of the last groups of people who are going to have the opportunity to hear this live testimony from someone. And it's our responsibility to make sure one day our children and our grandchildren understand what happens. When you hear these surveys in America, that something like 80% of people have no idea, like about the Holocaust, and they have no idea how many people died. And we really have to carry on the message. And thank you to people like you for sharing your story, because that's the power of sharing the message. And
I'm speaking tomorrow to another group.
Thank you for sharing your story as many times as possible. And to all the people listening on JIC, we look forward to having you next week. We have a program for Yom ZikaRon with soldiers and as well as families for bereaved, people who've lost either children or siblings in the bombings, in the wars. So it's a very powerful program. We would love you to join us. Stay tuned for that. And with that, thank you, everyone. Good evening. And
thank you so much for being a wonderful host and hostess. And to see all these young people here is just great.
Thank you.